Hello again, everyone. TJ Schwartz here. I'm here with Lucas Burnley. This is the Edge and Flow podcast where we talk about knives, of course, designing and making them, craftsmanship, knife shows, how to build a business, and how not to build a business sometimes.
Sometimes.
How you doing, Lucas?
Man, I'm doing good. Full tank right now.
Yeah, same.
Good. Well, we only missed 1 week this time, which is like I'm feeling pretty strong about that. I think we should do shop updates. You've been quietly cranking. I'm just coming out of my last show of the year. Do you wanna start with what you've got going on?
Sure. Yeah. The LT5 is finally like kind of fully installed into our system because it needed to become a weekly. We talked about a little bit on the last episode, but it needed to become a weekly installment into our schedule, and it has officially become that. So we're building a certain amount of them every week, and it's worked pretty well in that regard, and we're super happy. So that new formula with the A2 is now sustaining. And so we're going to continue to expand on that and whatnot. But one of the main things is that it has fully bottlenecked our Tormach because the Tormach runs our sheaths and our scales. And the LT5 being fully 3D machined and being a large scale it just takes quite a bit of time for the machine to crank them out. So I'm beginning the process of migrating the LT5 scales to the Sile, which I don't really look forward to because we're going to start running them wet with coolant as opposed to dry.
Oh
And
wow.
in doing so, I have everything ordered to build a DIY paper band auxiliary tank with a paper band filter on it
Okay.
to prevent buildup essentially. And we're going to see if we can get that to work.
Okay. I gave you my limited experience with wet milling composites again
Mm-hmm.
in like some significant numbers, and it was pretty shocking. So I'm
Kind of
really
sucks.
curious to I really wanted it to be better for me than it was. And I'm sure it can't, like I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I ran into enough like pain points that I feel like solving for dry at this point might be my solution.
Mm.
When do you get your new machine?
It they are saying August, so
Okay.
that's been the agreement for a few months now. So it's looking
Okay.
like
So
I just
you don't have like an ETA other than a month.
yeah, they're
Like you
saying
don't, yeah.
August. So
Okay.
yeah, it's because it's the new. I mean, this is the first wave to come to the U.S., so it's kind of like I almost like pre-ordered one.
Right.
And so with an X7, it would be totally different because it's a stable, consistent influx of those
Right.
coming in.
Right.
So we're still waiting on the X9, which is fine. It's actually the timing is about perfect because it gave us some breathing room after the crazy last few months we've had.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm starting to look forward to it because what we're looking at, and the reason I'm running the material wet in the sile is that I found an issue with using a machine to go dry and wet. I found needed to be one or the other.
One or the other. Totally.
And because if you go run flood coolant, the entire machine covers in a film of oil.
Yep.
You run dry, even with a good vacuum, everything just slowly darkens because the dust sticks to the walls, it sticks to all the
Yeah.
surfaces, it sticks to all the tool holders, and you're in there with like a paper towel
Yeah.
wiping this just nasty soot off of like the whole thing. And so with the Tormach, we wiped everything with Windex. Like I spent hours like drying and cleaning every surface, and then anything that needed to be, I put a rust preventer on it. But as far as the enclosure and like the tool changer, bone dried, no oil. And then when you run dry, the dust can get vacuumed up because it doesn't stick to the walls
Right.
anymore. And so the sile, if we're going to have scales and tangs on it, we kind of have to run it all wet. And so I do think eventually if the X9 shows up and if it's going to do bevel grinding, but if it has the time to also do the perimeter machining,
Yeah.
then it will be a wet machine. And then the X7 will probably go back to being dry for scales only.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, so it'll like directly replace the Tormach in that
And then
regard.
Tormach would stay Kydex.
Kydex. Yeah.
I love that as like a flow as you're adding equipment. The last piece is kind of shifting down the
Yeah,
production
kind of
line.
demoted. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
you're like, hey, you're still working really well, but like we're gonna shift you. Like that
Yeah,
seems like perfect for the Tormach, honestly, where you're like, cool, there's no like spindle load, like you don't need a lot of tools, like all
yeah.
of that is a good application.
Hmm.
I'm struggling with one spindle right now.
It's one spindle is extremely difficult, I found.
It
Yeah.
Well, it's just this idea of like as soon as there's some level of efficiency, you just start to see the
It's just
bottlenecks. And you're
instant
like
bottleneck. Yeah.
making one thing, you can do it the most inefficient way possible. 10 things still. And then it's like as that number scales, you just start to see like minutes matter,
Mm.
like seconds matter at a point, but like minutes, you're like, whoa, it really adds up. Cleaning time, like everything that's related in this little ecosystem also scales, and it is shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. With the Tormach this week, it's just become apparent because we have these numbers we're trying to hit on the LT5, and you can calculate exactly how many hours are going to be required to do those scales.
Right.
And so it's like we know at what point in the week, like if we're not starting on LT5s at this time, it's not going to be done because you can't make the machine hurry. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
there's either enough time or there isn't. And so this week we knew that the last scale for this batch was going to come off in the last 30 minutes of Thursday of the last day.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we're like, we can't turn it off for lunch. We can't stop this machine. So it's like we staggered our lunches so that there's always someone to make sure that that
Oh,
thing kept running. Because if we missed one cycle, it's like the batch is incomplete, which obviously is kind of arbitrary. But
sure.
it's like we're min maxing that Tormach. It is a
Yeah.
40-hour machine right now, and the Sile runs 1 day a week. So we're like totally lopsided. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just because everything that is bottlenecked is dry. You know what I mean? And that's like a problem. That's a sticking point right there because we need the Sile to be able to run some of these dry processes. So,
It's interesting because with some of this too, and this might be like my hand making side or just like a way that my brain works, but like you're like, oh, the like for scales or something like that, you're like tolerances are less, like tools less. It's but the time, like, so you're bottlenecking because of that, where it's like, oh, maybe that's actually where like the way more efficient machine actually belongs. Where you're
yeah,
like, yep, no, we need way faster rapids, we need higher spindle speed. Like it's counterintuitive, at least to my brain, but it
yeah,
makes sense from like a production standpoint.
yeah. And I'm going to say this right now. Dalton and I were talking about it. The Tormach is super accurate.
Yeah,
Like it's actually, I mean, I kind of just forget about it, but like the way the LT5 scales are set up requires quite a bit of accuracy because we're trying to have them match the tang
right.
exactly. Dude, it hits it every time. It's perfect.
Yeah,
It's super accurate. It's just slow.
it's just
It's
slow. Yeah,
really the only drawback to the Tormach. I'll take that back. It doesn't have enough rigidity to do a lot of the stuff we want to do in steel. But when it
right.
comes to like the scales,
Yeah,
I don't see the Sile doing any better job on the scales. It's going to be pretty much the same result.
right.
It's just going to do it faster. And
Well,
so,
and that's like proper application for the equipment,
yeah.
right? That I don't know, like I still get like little machine shop and all these things where it's you're like, yeah, you can get a TAG micro mill
Hmm.
and you could cut anything on it. It's just how fast are you going to cut it
Yeah.
and with what tools. So if it lacks rigidity to do like the bigger jobs, it's just doesn't mean it's not a good machine. It just means it's not a good machine for
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You and I have been looking at routers for that same reason. And like I'm at the point where like looking at a router versus looking at like a small mill like a Tormach, I'm like, I haven't been able to make an argument to like switch to router. It's like by the time you add like an automatic tool
Yeah.
changer, it starts to push into mill territory. And I'm like, I feel like I would almost just rather get like a 10-year-old Haas mini mill and never run coolant in it. And that's just
Yeah.
my dry milling machine
Yeah.
because it's cheaper than a router and it's a Haas.
Yeah, the tool changes really get you into trouble on the routers because
Yeah.
it requires a certain type of spindle, and then because I mean you can't auto tool change on just like a call it chuck router. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's got to have a taper of some kind, and yeah, it really inflates the price when you try to tool change. And I've found with scales that I mean, you have to tool change. You can't. Our scales, there's
I
no way.
wonder, I wonder with scales if there's like a custom tooling workaround where like, okay, so you need a ball. You need to be able to interpolate, uh, hardware holes, and you need to be able to cut a profile. It's like, can you just do all that with the same tool or like a stepped tool? Or it's like a version to where it's like, if it's just scales, is there actually like, oh, I got a $5,000 CNC router. I run this one bit. This one bit is able to do all of the features
Yeah.
on a set of scales.
I mean, if you had a long enough ball that's a
Yeah.
small enough diameter,
Yeah.
it's conceivably possible.
Yeah. Just
But
something, I don't know, something to think
yeah,
about.
yeah,
It's all the workaround. It's like when you have the like every tool is a hammer kind of
yeah,
concept where you're like, if it's what you have, there's probably a way to figure it out
yeah,
to maximize the efficiency.
no doubt.
I know the LT5's gotten some traction. Like if people want to like learn about it, like that is getting like hitting some like YouTube traction.
Yeah, so I've been really happy with how it's been received because like I've said before, I needed to cast a new net in terms of this is a more bushcraft survival knife, and
Yeah.
none of our other stuff is in that category. So I needed to see what people thought about it when it went onto the YouTube airwaves. And so just recently, Gideon's Tactical, who helped modify the design, he was handling prototypes before production.
Oh,
And so
cool.
I credit him on the website with like helping with certain decisions on the knife, which is awesome. But he did a YouTube video on it. That's Gideon's Tactical channel. And then there's a few others. Last Huntsman Outdoors, actually the first one, but just a few of the bushcraft channels on YouTube have been using it, and I was really curious because to me it feels almost like starting a new business. Because like
Totally.
I started with the Overland, and I remember the feeling of like, what are people going to think? With the Magnica, how's it going to go? People liked it, but then when I launched the Overland Sport, I know the steel and the heat treat. I know like the geometry and the edge. Like I know who I'm selling to. And so
Hmm.
it's like, it's just an addition. Whereas the LT5 is like, this is a different scene, right? I'm entering a
Right.
room that I don't know anybody and they don't know me. How is this going to go? And I'm really happy with how it's going. I'm really happy with the A2. I'm really happy with it. So,
Nice. It's interesting. That is not, it's not a thought that I've really had. And I just think it's because of like the way that I came up through the industry, which is like the fact that there are actually subset different markets, like past like fixed and folder, but I just make what I make,
mhm,
right? As as I'm starting to shift a little bit and trying to like do some, some in-house models with it where I could like maybe achieve some numbers, I suppose it's starting to come into play a little bit, but it's not as clearly defined as
mhm,
like what you're doing. And I think that is it's pretty cool that you can almost like you just like target a section of the market.
mhm.
Be a fun game to like build out what those sections truly are, or like a
Yeah,
thought exercise. Like even if you think about like tactical is a catch-all, right? It's like inside of the tactical market, what sub genres
yeah,
are there, and like how do you attach to those?
yeah. Sit down and draw out like a Venn
Yeah.
bubble
Yeah.
diagram of, yeah, it'd be interesting.
I actually think that the Overland, if you were to like put a Venn diagram, I think that one it rides some middle lines like very, very well,
Hmm.
which is kind of cool because I think it actually slips into the tactical market just on like a design language standpoint and construction, but then intentionality, like it shifts off into like outdoor market, the Overland market, like the functionality pushes it in another direction where like someone looking at it could understand it easily as one of two things, like based on their filter.
Mhm.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
LT5 running. Uh, what else?
Um, Loving our air conditioning. I gotta say, this shop, I had my little tiny one car garage shop. This shop is way more thermally stable than my little one car garage.
Your
Uh,
machines don't heat it up. Like,
no, they don't heat it up, and the air conditioner in here, dude, is I suspect it's for a much bigger building because it will freeze us cold. I mean, it's been almost
I love
110
it.
degrees. It'll be 110 black
Yeah.
asphalt on the other side of a garage door
Yeah.
into this shop, and you walk out. It's easily like 115 standing on that blacktop. You come inside, spend a couple hours, and it's literally Dalton and I both are like, I got to put a jacket on It's like,
Dude,
because the,
I don't know like who needs to hear this, but like if you're if you're like on the if you like have a shop and you're like, man, it's super hot. Nah, I don't need an AC. Like I can do this. This is like there's some stuff that's like efficiency. So like I'm gonna be your hype man. Like get an AC. Have a heated shop, have a cooled shop. It makes you more efficient. It makes your work
Mhm.
better. If you're comfortable and you can like exist in the space, like you get more done. I don't know what this like fascination with like doing things like the hardest, most uncomfortable, inefficient way is. Like I'm all for being uncomfortable when I need to be or in areas that I see a lot of value. Me working over a long time horizon, no. Ergonomics, like your space, it's like look at Jens Enso. He like takes it to the point where he's like, I want it visually pleasing
Mhm.
because I have to be in here.
Mhm.
Dude, climate control your shop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's funny because it's just one
I.
duct that blows all that cold air. And if I'm sharpening or if Dalton's on the sandblaster, that's like right where it's aiming. So we need to baffle it and change the direction because I noticed Dalton like would hang his hoodie on the sandblaster and he would like walk over to sandblast and like put his hoodie on and then start blasting and then take it off because it's like right there. It's like like a Arctic wind just
Dalton's
hitting.
a pretty slender dude too, so he
Yeah.
doesn't have the thermal mass to like
Yep.
stay warm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I'm super happy with that because I mean we moved into the building and I'm like I don't know how summer's going to go in such a big metal building. We'll see. And I'm just I'm I guess pitching for the AC unit we have. I don't know what it is, but it
There you
works.
go. Dude, again, all this stuff, like that's an efficiency that really, really is. Just being comfortable in your space.
Hmm.
All right, hang
Your
on.
turn. What's your shop updates?
Okay. Shop updates right now. So we just got back from PNWCI, which is the Pacific Northwest Custom Invitational. It's a show put on by Billy Cho and Nick Rolfe in Seaside, Oregon. Um, Man, I could probably just run on this show for a while.
Okay.
It's awesome. If you don't know Billy, Billy is a knife maker and a gunsmith. He has Ironborn Armory, and like one of the things that Billy does is build super, super awesome AK platform rifles, like one MOA AKs.
Wow.
He's very good. Nick Rolfe is an amazing musician and he's been in the knife industry for a long time. Like they make a really good team.
Hmm.
I think the show is definitely like a passion project. And it was kind of one of these things where like every year they're like, well, we did it and that was awesome. Don't know if we'll do it again. I have the sense that at this point it's starting to like stabilize.
Hmm.
Um, Man, and it's awesome. So this is the first show that my littlest boy Winston has been to, and this is the first show that Bo's been to since he was a baby. Very family friendly because you're in Seaside. There's a lot to do. There's the ocean. It's also just the vibe. It's it's not a trade show. It's it's like a small get together.
Hmm.
Um, the roster of knife makers is pretty heavy hitting. And a lot of that is like a testament to relationships, right? Because the first one, it's a 4 hour show, but a lot of people knew Billy and Nick. So their friends came and their friends just happened to be high level knife makers. Um, and that from that point forward, it's just kind of gotten better and better and better every
Nice.
year. Um, it was man, it was really awesome. It was amazing having my family back or having my family at the show. It was amazing having Maddie back at a show with me. Um, Audience, like crowd was great. I'm trying to think of like high points. We did we did a side event that was really fun. Shows right now, man, like we were kind of we can dive into this more too, but like I need to keep shows exciting for myself somehow. Like I have to have something that's like really interesting. Um, this year we decided to do an event that we called B-side. And basically what that looked like was renting a small booth inside of an antique mall about 4 blocks from the show venue as a pop-up vintage shop for our brand. Um, we had product made specifically for that show. We had like modified apparel. We had like actual vintage apparel that we modified, just like trying to kind of do like, I don't know, like a brand. I don't know if like introspective is the right word. Like one of the things, like for instance, we always have the show banner with us at shows. It's like our Burnley Rose. It's kind of like a big shield. We sold that. And that has been with us at shows for, I don't know, 6 years or something like that.
Mm.
Probably maybe even more than that, right? So a collector got to buy that piece. And I love that idea that you're able to like kind of get these pieces that have like some historical relevance or like
Mm-hmm.
what it is, but not a lot of other people do. It also the show is one day, and I realize like a lot of people come into town for the weekend, and I just thought it would be fun to like create an event, an activity,
Mm-hmm.
and the indoor flea market is super cool, and I loved the idea that like we could set this thing up. They would be able to pull a percentage of our sales, which like helps local economy, which is rad. Not that they necessarily need it, but I like the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way for me to be able to hit some of the like the ideas and exciting projects I want, and also not like have a table that is like insanely cluttered. Cause there's no, I mean, we filled out like a 10-foot booth, and at the show I had a 6-foot table.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of this way of like extending, the show weekend.
I gotta say, dude, that's Burnley at its best, at your best. That is
Thank
like
you.
that is the most Burnley thing I've ever heard to do a pop up like that. I mean, that's what's made you and your brand what they are, is doing stuff like that. That's stuff that nobody else would think about, to be honest. That's cool.
Thanks, man. I got really nice feedback on it. People seem to have a good time. And like we had a range. I like to do silly stuff. I don't always want to be super serious. And like doing shows is stressful for me, right? It's a perfect storm. And doing right now, like doing 2 shows in the summer back to back, what I consider like kind of high level work with my kids the ages they are, like, dude, it was hard. Like there's no way around it. Like I've worked 7 days a week through, I don't know, since like March or April. Not how I want to do it. This gave this last little push, like some real incentive that
Hmm.
was like, it felt good. The feedback we got was good, but it allowed me to do so. Like we did beach towels.
Nice.
Like I'm not going to always run beach towels, but if I do a show at a
It's
beach
seaside, yeah.
and we do it in an indoor flea market, like the idea of like the part of like the concept was actually to have it feel like in situ the rest of the indoor flea market, right?
So
Which is why we did like the vintage apparel.
I gotta ask the owner of that flea market, like, what were their feelings on all this? Because I bet they were kind of taken back. Like, this is
So
interesting.
she was super super cool. Maddie actually kind of spearheaded it, which if it wasn't for Maddie and Joey, this wouldn't have happened, right? I was able to put together a lot of the conceptual stuff and the product.
Excuse me.
Bless you. But they did the booth setup. Like when we got to Seaside, like I was done.
Mm.
Like work was done, pieces were made. They went and set up the booth from an aesthetic standpoint and like a functional standpoint, and it was amazing because like I think that ability to like have a little bit of delegation, but also like if me and Maddie had done it, I think we would have probably just argued about where things went. And I realized I'm like, what you want this booth to look like, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just lost my train of thought completely. Yeah, fully thinking about like that I couldn't have done it on my own.
Delegation
Oh,
of,
you
yeah.
were asking about the owner of the booth. So
Oh,
Maddie set up like the original interactions and everything. What was I think one of the things that was really nice, one of our collectors was like, "Hey, I've been to that. I went there last year, and we come to Seaside like a couple times a year, and we always stop into this antique mall." She's like, "They put it on for you. Like they had this older, like old biker dude, Steve, who actually we didn't realize this, but he like hung out in the booth the whole weekend. He's a vendor in the flea market, but I think they were like, oh, it's knives. Like there's a bunch of knives and stuff. So he's going to walk those up to the counter,
Mm,
right? We stopped and talked to them for a while, and it seemed like he was just having a blast
that's
because
awesome.
all these people are coming in. They're super excited, kind of like nerding out over what's there. He's like, extrovert, like having a fun time talking. So I think that the overall like experience for the shop was good. Our collectors are like super respectful and nice and like spent money in the like antique mall anyway, like bought other things. So I think it was good. I think if we want to do it again, we definitely could. And I think if the show venue doesn't change, there's a pretty good chance that we would.
Sweet.
I don't think it's necessarily something that I would carry to another show because now it feels like this could be an event for like this.
Hmm.
Um, on the flip side, this is a prime example of like ADHD because added a huge level of complexity to our show and the months leading up to it. I, I am getting more okay with that, like just being part of the process,
Hmm.
right? But it like when you're in it, you're like, why am I doing this? This is crazy. You don't even know if it's going to be successful, but it's cool. Like in my brain, I'm like, all right, we're going
Yeah.
to do this.
Well, that's what I mean. It's very Burnley. It's like very the spontaneousness of
Yeah.
the Burnley image is
Yeah.
like that's like, right on the money for brand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it makes I'm sure it makes it's a hard task for you to like maintain that, but at the same
Right.
time, that's Burnley. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it comes with the territory.
I felt pretty good. So like we and made it through the show, spent a couple days on the coast, took Bo surfing, ocean surfing for the first time,
Nice.
which was like a high point for me, and he loved it. And it's like one more thing that we can do side by side together now. So yeah, that was a long diatribe on just the show. I do have shop updates, but I kind of want to roll into this is my show done for the year. Okay. From here on out, I feel like it's all shop updates. I'm super excited to like dive into all of these projects that I've kind of had simmering. You have one more show for the year?
Two.
Two. Oh, two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, because you have Blade West.
So we have our booth assignment for Blade West that came
Okay.
through. They moved to a bigger room. This is in October. It's like the very first weekend of October, like the third
Okay.
or something. But we
Oh,
got a booth
rough.
space in yeah, in the Salt Palace for Blade Show West in a new bigger room, which I'm super excited. Blade West is amazing. I love Blade Show West. Like I love
Yeah,
that
I
show.
said you and I went to the
It
first
fits.
one in Salt Lake, right?
Yep.
That is a perfect location.
We exhibited there last year. I loved it. It went great. It was great in every
Yeah.
way. We can drive it down. Yeah, it's awesome. But another show is the Makers Syndicate, which is in September. So this is gonna
Yeah.
be like September. I want to say it's like middle of September. I forget exactly the date. But the Makers Syndicate's in Indianapolis. It's hosted by Daniel at Oz Machine Company, and so they're another knife maker slash knife company that decided to host their own show.
Yep.
Super interesting premise. Super excited about this show. It's a fledgling show, but they scaled it up a lot this year because
Couple years running, or was last year the
I want to
first?
say this is the third year, but don't quote me. It might be the second. It's probably the
Okay.
third though. And so they've been the way they've targeted it is like they wanted to find like wedding venues in like old industrial type settings,
Sick.
so it's sort of like your old, like an old steel mill with like the big tall windows and the brick and like beams. They went from a smaller one last year to a bigger one this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so just imagine like hardwood floor wedding venue type deal in a city. And it's the interesting twist on this show that I think is unique is that they call it the Maker Syndicate because the only products that can be sold at the show are products that that person made or that person and their team made.
Right.
And so it's like if you're a company that has some OEM and some in-house, you're only allowed to bring the in-house stuff. So it doesn't
So
matter.
where do they draw? This is an interesting one. One, I love that you're doing this show. Okay. Because in general, I would say that this is like, it's a 1 day show,
Like
right?
another 5 hour type deal, just
It's like
like,
a 5 hour type deal. I
yeah.
think I'm a big fan of kind of like crossing over. Like our brand is more suited in general to a 5 hour show when I'm doing custom work. That doesn't mean that Blade Show Atlanta is also not a good thing for me to be at. The reverse is true for you, where it's like Blade Show Atlanta might actually, or Blade Show West might be like kind of your bread and butter. But I think that doing these smaller shows gives you a different access to an audience. It might push you to do a few pieces that are like different,
Mhm.
think about a show differently. I think there's a huge amount of value.
Yeah.
Where does this show draw the line from? So is it OEM? So it's not outsourced process. They're not dictating that. They're just saying
It,
whatever your process is to make a part, it has to be that.
yeah, it
Would
just
that be
has like,
accurate?
it's like it, I mean, it explicitly says in the email, I don't have it pulled up right now, but it explicitly says like, we understand that pretty much everybody outsources something. Like
Okay.
I
Yeah,
outsource
yeah,
heat
yeah.
treat. It's not like
Yeah.
it's not a sole authorship thing like you'll see in like the ABS.
Right.
It's not that extreme.
Right.
It's just, can you say that you made that product? You know what I
Right.
mean?
But
And it,
they're actually allow, and this is partially like what Oz's roots are, right? Like
yeah.
as a manufacturer, they're allowing that concept. It's not broken down by like, right now you've kind of heard me rail on like the idea of like machine assisted customs because it's so nebulous right now. I think like the industry is looking for ways to like categorize and like understand things, but like there's a lot of misunderstanding in that.
Mhm.
What I love about this show is that it's a higher end kind of exclusive show. Is it an invitational?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's an
Yeah.
invitational, but their criteria is like pretty broad and what I would consider like more contemporary. And I think that's very, very cool.
Yeah, and I think part of the concept behind the idea was that I think they stated this in the email was that at pretty much every knife show you kind of have to ask about the products from a
Yeah.
standpoint of like, oh,
Yeah.
did who made this? You know what I mean? And
Right.
that's like a
Yeah.
valid question, not knocking that at all. I'm just saying that's like a
Totally.
normal conversation to have. Whereas at this show, the concept is like you don't have to ask. If it's
Right.
in the room, you don't have
It
to
was
ask.
made
It
by
was
that
made by
person
that person.
in their
Yeah.
shop with
Yeah.
them or their team. And it
Yeah.
runs the gamut from, single maker in a shop to
Hmm.
a small team. Yeah. That, well, like we talked about after Atlanta, like the rise of like OEM knife brands. There's so many right now because the OEM options are like very good.
Yeah.
Right.
Very
And
good.
they're
Yeah.
very accessible. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, you really couldn't do it in the same way.
Hmm.
You basically had to have connections that would put you in with a manufacturer in Asia. So that's like an interesting take on that. I like
Hmm.
it a lot, man. That's very cool.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm excited. And yeah, the reason it kind of happened is Daniel came up to my booth in Atlanta. Um, we had a good conversation going. We hung out in the pit for a while. We're talking, and I mean, it was fun because we're just talking about steel. We're talking about manufacturing. He's like, "You should come to the show," and I was, I'd heard of it, but it wasn't even on my radar really.
Yeah.
So he just in person like invited me in the pit, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there." And the nice thing is that it's in and out. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
yeah, it's in Indianapolis. That's a ways away, but I can just go. I can bring a rifle case on the airplane.
Yep.
I can set it on a table. I can pack it back up. I can leave. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's a very, very low commitment level from a like logistics standpoint,
Yeah.
which I'm super excited about. So it's gonna be fun.
It's pretty amazing. Like the last few years shows have been really tricky multiple levels, but this year I think it really seeded again like what the value of doing shows is. And like everybody's heard me say this, like it's not about sales, it's about community.
Mhm.
But the sales play, and getting ready for a show, having that influx of cash a couple times a year, like it does help the line. Even if there's an expense to it, it's like you can't, yeah, man, you can't recreate selling a knife face to face online. You just
Mhm.
can't. You can't, because you have a conversation. The interactions are different. You sit in the pit and talk to people, or like, the PNWCI, awesome. They have a big beach bonfire afterwards. I was out there
Mhm.
till 2 o'clock in the morning, like just talking with people.
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
there is intangible. There's like intangible value to that. Is that even the right word? Kind of like,
Intangible. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
intangible. Yeah, there's like an
Yeah.
intangible quality to it where like, who knows what that does, how it affects your business, but I guarantee over the long run it does.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Right.
And with the Maker Syndicate, they do have a social, I can't remember if it's like a dinner, I don't remember, but there's like, I think it's after the show. It's like everyone kind of congregates in a specific place, and it's just like it's part of social addition to the show itself. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
It's not,
And it's
dude, it's
like,
so fun watching the adaptations, and like networking is a prime example. Like, I've never met him, right? He didn't come to my table. You are doing a similar type of work, a similar type of process. You're in that sphere.
mhm.
He made the effort to come and stop by your table.
Mhm.
And this is like, so like, I would say Billy Cho is the same for me, or a lot of shows up until this point. And I love that it is actually starting, like there are new things happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shows, for me, it shows health in the industry in different ways. Actually, that actually I think is a great segue into something that you and I are kind of seeing simultaneously, which is conversations happening around business both being at its best and at its like worst in the knife industry right now.
Mhm.
And maybe why some of that is happening. Does
Yeah.
that feel, the show, like a show as an analogy for that
Yeah.
feels accurate?
Yeah. There's another way to put it is like there feels like there's a little bit of a feast and famine at the same time
Yeah,
in the knife industry.
right.
Right now, there's a feast and a famine happening, which
Yeah.
is,
You're hearing both.
yeah, yeah. It's like stratifying in a weird way that I don't recall this being quite like that. I don't know. It's interesting.
So what is that? What do you
I
think?
mean, the only explanation I can think about is like there's some sort of migration happening. You know what I mean? It's like there's there's new opportunities, and then there's models and situations that are no longer as viable, and it happened relatively quickly. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And it's like I'm still trying to put my finger on exactly what's going on. You know what I mean? It's just such a weird situation. But yeah, I do feel for, I mean, I'm just gonna be flat out honest. Like I do feel for, there are some brands out there that are having a hard time in the knife industry.
Right.
And I don't like to hear that, you know what I mean? But it's like, but there's other brands that are doing better than ever. And it's super strange to me.
Well, where yeah, where's the disconnect? It's like your thing on kind of cycles also, like I always use a fashion analogy because they say it like travels and it's like a 15-year cycle.
Hmm.
I would really like to stop using that, and I would love to be able to use the knife industry as an example. I don't know the data.
Hmm.
I only know like how it feels in my brand, how it feels like in some of my friends' brands, where like when things come back around or like an interest comes back around. The part of the way that this conversation came was, I think you had said, you're like, we had like a great month. This is awesome. I feel like fixed blades are having like this resurgence, right? And I pushed back on that a little bit, in that when I see you having a great month, I think it's because, and it could be, you could be totally right. I could be wrong, but I feel like it's the work and the interest in like the way that you're showing up can't help but lead to that, like things being more successful,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, dude, you're doing great work. You're being active on social media. You're showing the work. You're doing shows. You're like releasing new products, but like also engaging the community with those products, and you're building network. So if that doesn't lead to things being more successful, like what does?
Mm. Yeah.
Right? That
That's
to me is
interesting.
like big tree roots, because you're
Yeah.
building things in a stable, that's like how you actually build a stable platform and demand for product,
I hope so. Yeah. I
right?
appreciate that.
So on the flip side of that, why is there an industry slump? Is it a glut of a certain type of product? Is it that brands are kind of like not like resting on their laurels, but just kind of like, we did have some big boom years. We're not in the big boom years. Not everything is selling just because it exists in,
Yeah.
cyberspace.
Yeah.
So is that why there's this disc, like this, I don't know, feast or famine?
Yeah. If there is, I don't know. I mean, nobody knows the data, but if there is like a shrinkage that happened in the last couple of years after the kind of outdoor knife COVID boom and everybody, with their extra money to spend during that time, like if there is a shrinkage since then, I mean, it's got to be felt somewhere, but I can't say that I know exactly why it's affecting sectors and not others. You know what I mean? It's like a not symmetrical shrinkage, it feels like to me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Because
It
I'll
could
just
be
say
not
that
correlative at
the
all.
elephant in the room is like the most spectacular knife company probably ever founded in history as far as like meteoric rise is happening right now. Montana Knife Company. Like
Absolutely.
no knife company has ever grown that fast ever. There's no way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like that's happening right now.
Yeah.
So you can't, you know what I mean? So it's like at the same time there's a slump happening, but the fastest growing knife company in history
And
also
doing it with
exists.
things that like people say can't be done,
Yeah.
which is like fixed blades that are fairly
Yeah.
expensive. So
Yeah.
it's the process.
Yeah.
Process is the product, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, seriously, like this, this is something that spans, I think, the aisle from custom to production, right? And inside of like the custom market, and in, I don't know, like people in general, like you always hear the phrase like, comparison is the thief of joy. Run your own race. I think there's a lot of value in those concepts. However, if you are a business and if you are a craftsperson, I actually think there's a huge amount of value in being able to like model, to be able to look at a maker or a brand and be like, wow, they are doing what I would like to be doing, or what they're doing is very impressive. What practices can I include in my process to like achieve some of that?
Hmm.
That to me, I mean, like in business, modeling is like a huge thing. That's a good, it's figuring it out, right? It's not about comparison. It's not about like wanting what someone else has. It's about, I think, accepting that you don't have all the answers, and that someone further along in the process may have figured some things out that could be helpful. I remember like really early on looking at Ernest Emerson and thinking like, man, that's really, really cool. Like he was a custom maker. He now has this knife company. How did he get there? And then you like look back and you're like, oh, here's when he did like an overseas OEM project. But this is like free, right? This is when that was not a common
Yeah.
thing. And you're like injection molded scales. I think it was like the Raven or something. And you're like, oh man, okay. So he did that maybe before there was like his own in-house production. Maybe that was like an influx of cash that let him like step up the next level.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff right now, I feel like people are almost stubbornly staying in their own like zone of influence and like skill set. And like, I don't know, it's like really dogmatic and strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
So things are changing. You can adapt or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
It's definitely changing. I got to say that.
right.
And it's never changed this fast that I can perceivably in the time that I've been around.
Dude, it is changing. The social media thing is crazy. Like right now, it is seeming to ramp up. I've got multiple blocked posts that can't be recommended. I just saw that Sam Raven the Pirate, he's got posts that are blocked, and he's just basically shooting like beautiful content
Hmm. Yeah.
and
There's
showing a knife.
nothing
We're
inflammatory at
just
all.
getting constantly flagged. This is a real problem.
Hmm.
This is another area where you want to have that like the strong base,
Yeah.
right? Ben Peterson, our good friend from NAFS, always talks about like owning the land that you're on.
Yeah.
He has a background that allows him to really understand SEO. I don't do that, but I have a mailing list, right? Your
Yeah.
mailing list is gold. Like you're closer to owning that. Like if I had a
Yeah.
physical mailing list, like now's the time to send out postcards.
Yeah.
Like
All right.
it's I think so. You've talked about this a lot when we were doing CAD, and I think maybe you talked about it in the your CAD course. Do you actually talk about your CAD course? The idea of or the concept around building robust
Yes.
models.
100%.
Okay,
Yeah.
100%. So for you, as it relates to CAD, how do you quantify a robust model?
So a robust model in a CAD model scenario, and which we're going to use as a metaphor, I think,
Yep.
is a model that gives you the deliverable that you want at the end of it, which is like the file to then program off of or to send to injection molding. But more importantly than that, the ability to adjust critical features without a collapse of the model. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so a lot of people end up in a CAD situation with a deliverable model that is exactly what they're looking for,
Right.
but it lacks the adjustability
Yeah. The
that you can do on the
flexibility.
fly
Yeah.
and the flexibility. And the problem with that is that it very much deters refinement,
Yeah.
because if you get to the end of this journey of CAD modeling something and you get a result and it's a deliverable, but you notice there's an ergonomic issue, there's
Yeah.
a something is not 100%, but you know that like if I change that feature, it's going to collapse this whole model. So I'm just going to live with it. And I think a lot of people that know CAD know that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I made that decision so early on and I
Yeah.
boxed myself in. And to be honest, like it's 90% done. So like I'm just going to live with it. But if
Can't.
you have
Yeah.
a robust model that like, oh, I'm going to change that by 5 degrees or whatever, and it's not going to implode the model so I can 3D print it again or whatever, that deterrent factor allows for like a further refinement than just in factoring in human nature. Like if it's easy to do, you're going to chase it further. You're going to do
Yeah.
it more,
Yielding a
um,
better product
yielding a better
over a
result.
timeline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so if you can modify it quickly, efficiently, and it's not as rigid and it's not fragile, then even though the deliverable may end up being identical, you can get there in a much more efficient, less deterrent way. And so I think what you're getting at is the metaphor is like the business model being operated in that such a way
Yes.
that when the sands of the industry, where's the money flowing, where are the
Yep.
eyeballs, when that happens, do you have levers to pull that can change your course
Yeah.
that don't break you in the process?
Right. Yeah. The goal is to bend, not break.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So, and I talked to you a little bit about the class that you did in Atlanta, and a lot of the takeaways there and like the concept of like running kind of like you could explain it better than I do, but like the thought exercise of like looking at your capabilities, capacities, network, I think is really relevant in this. So the idea would be like if you are a sole source business, how do you create flexibility and resiliency around that? So if you're an OEM and you're dependent on one manufacturer, if something happens to that manufacturer, you have no product, right? Is there another product that you can add from a different manufacturer? Ideally, a manufacturer in a different sector
Yeah.
at a different price point,
And
right?
also, if you are using an OEM model, OEM adds a lot of time frame. You know what I mean? We all know
Yeah.
this. Like there's a prototyping phase, there's a
Yep.
production phase. You have to deal with scheduling.
Yep.
Is there something you can add to your business that allows a sharper pivot? In
Yes.
other words, maybe it's not a knife. Maybe it's
Right.
something that you can still have OEM'd, but the cycle is so much shorter that
Yep.
it gives you like that steerage that allows you to change direction faster.
Yep.
And so if you're stuck in a situation where you have a multi-year plan that's rigid, that's exactly what we're talking about is like
Yep.
you can't steer. Like,
Can't steer it. Right.
yeah. So maybe you're going the right direction now, but what
Yeah.
happens when
You
something
send it,
changes?
but then there's a crash or a
Yeah.
tariff or
Yeah.
and the same goes for being someone who's making everything 100% by hand, right? On the opposite end of the spectrum. What happens if you hurt yourself?
Mm,
Like, what is the thing that brings in revenue, right? Where is the fail safe, right? Like,
hmm
where's the redundancy?
And we recently had a revelation occur in our shop that I think is right along these lines, and that is part of how we're selling our knives. So up to just recently, all of our knives were custom ordered,
Right?
all of them. So it was like we
Every
just
single piece someone spec'd it out.
so there's always like this little lead time, and the order stack just grows and shrinks, and we just work on the lowest hanging fruit, which is like the oldest orders, and
Yeah.
we're just trying not to let a list get big, and then also not wanting it to get too small either, and that's fine. But the only problem with that is I found you subconsciously pace your work in the shop with the order flow, which is
Yeah.
good if that's you're just going to do that forever. It's like, okay, orders are a little slower and the list is shrinking. You innately like slow down a little bit. And then when the list starts to grow, you start going faster. And it's like you kind of innately just track with it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the old adage that like work will expand to the space that you give it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like that's fine, but it's like why is it that when times are really good and it's Q4, we're able to keep up, and then in the summer when times are slower, we're still keeping up in the same way, but we're making less. Like it's you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what we're starting to do is adding in stock as a layer on top, and I'm controlling the numbers of in stock that we are planning to produce to basically top off. So it's like if sales on the custom side are near our maximum, in
Right.
stock is going to be minimum. And I'm
Right.
planning it within a week. So it's like the very next week, we haven't even started on the in stocks. And then once we know that week, kind of the volume, we can scale and add and subtract.
Dude, I love that because you're being careful to not overextend yourself just to chase like a little bit of extra sales or like an arbitrary number.
hmm
You're actually looking at me like, this is what we were capable of producing. Sometimes we will sell through all of that in this model.
hmm
If we don't, we have the capacity to offer it in this model.
Yeah. Yep.
Super, super clean way to do it.
We've only been doing it for like 2 or 3 weeks now, but I just noticed how it basically amounts to having extra work to do. We got more to do now. We got a fuller schedule, but
Right.
the work still is getting done
Right.
because it's like we knew we could do it. Like we've done this before when the orders are like really piling on and we really got to turn up the heat. Like, what if there was a way, it's not artificial, but like a way to manage that like hands on. Like I said, I can pull levers that make sure that our output is matching the demand as closely as possible. And if you're just waiting for custom orders, I always felt like I can't control that. I don't know what do I do about that? You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right.
So that's where we're at, and it's worked stupendously. And that's also how we can factor in trade shows. So it's like, okay, we know a trade show is 2 months away. We have these capacities. These in stocks are now the feature of the business that's going to be directed towards the shows or
Mm-hmm.
directed towards we got a holiday coming up. It's whatever it is. And so it's like instead of competing, doing all custom work, and then a show's coming in, we got to somehow patch on this show onto this own custom
That
side.
would be what I'm doing right now, right? Like
Right.
that's more my model, and it's incredibly difficult.
It is. And we found that with Blade Show just, a couple months ago. It was like it just was a nightmare to add that to a system that
Yeah,
didn't include that. But now it's as if the show is already included. It's just instead of putting it on the website, we put it in a box. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So it's like that ability to modulate and kind of
yeah,
throttle. I've never had that. I've never had that ability before because it's always been waiting for custom orders.
right.
And it's just
And not fully knowing, yeah, like what's going on.
yeah, yep.
Yeah,
It's like the very next day could be a record day, or it could be 3 days of rough sales. I just
right,
have no idea. Like
right.
it's hard to say.
Yeah, that I think right now, I think all of this is incredibly tied together. Um, so second half of the year for me is essentially moving towards that. What I've seen is like, okay, I really am finding my love for shows again and simultaneously understanding that like I can't do them in the way that I have done them for years. I have to figure out a way that is more manageable,
Hmm.
which means I have to become more consistent, right? So the next half of this year is essentially going to be working through my processes, focusing on the Kihoku, which is like, this is a great example of modeling. Like, I'm modeling a lot of this after you, and I'm learning this from you. Why is that? Because I see the efficiency, I see like where it's creating space for you. Do I want to pivot my entire business to that? No. I want to learn something new. I want to add something that is more efficient than some of my other product and be able to reach an audience that I had for years and years, which is like the fixed blade market, which I haven't been able to like connect with. Modeling is really, really good. It's okay to like look outside of what you're doing,
Hmm.
right? Don't have all the answers. And like more than that, like as we get older and like we're getting more set in our ways, like the ability to like look around and be like, oh, this show is doing something really cool. I'm a show promoter. I do my shows this way. I've done my shows this way for 30 years. What are they doing and why are people going there? That's really interesting. Right. That process, I think, even in a small sense, like I think is starting to I'm seeing it affect the business. And that's like really nice. Like I have a few things that are more efficient than they've ever been. And I see the peace that it creates for me.
Hmm.
Because there is a point where like you don't like with custom work, a lot of times you have to solve the problem every time. Even if it's like low, like if it's fairly low impact for you because you have like the system where they can go in, they can order, you're set up to make the parts, you're still having to deal with that information.
Hmm.
That information scaled is more and more and more and more information. The ability to add in 10%, 20%, whatever it is of I make the product, I post the product, or I make the product goes to a show, right? I think that is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it frees up your brain. Like the hardest part, I think, for me over the last few months has really been how much I had to focus just on the show while my brain is also wanting to do other things and I just not having the physical time to do those.
Hmm.
And that is where I'm like, okay, if you have efficiency, you can allow yourself growth, right?
Hmm.
Like if you're digging a ditch, you're digging a ditch. You might be thinking a lot. You're not doing like other things. You're just like digging.
Hmm.
You're not getting other jobs for the next ditch. I don't know where this analogy came from, but like you're not hustling work. You're not like planning whatever the next
Yeah.
ditch looks like. Like
Yeah.
you're just digging. I think you have to have, or it benefits you to have some products or revenue that allows you to like have your time in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's for sure. Yeah, and I just kind of realized it just talking on the pod now about like talking about steering that came up and thinking about steering. You know what I mean? It's like make a boat
Mhm.
that's easy to steer and just in general, that's just that allows you to look away and then come back and make it quick adjustments. You know what I mean? That allows just crispness of decision making and then results that follow.
Yeah.
Um, and man, there's a lot of business models that aren't steerable. You know what I mean?
Right. It
Yeah.
is. It's like you
And
just like send it, and
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
okay, you know, Jesus
yeah,
take the wheel
yeah,
kind of vibe.
yeah.
And realizing like with scale, like there's obviously like as you get bigger, you get a certain type of resource, and then you also get certain limitations. Like there's only so much steerability. I've always liked the idea, like when I think about like growth, where it's like as small as possible, as big as necessary. I think that any business can probably look at that and kind of be like, all right,
Hmm.
where are our strengths? Like your that the class you did, like process of product class, like a big business can run that filter, right? And it's like, what is it? A lot of times a big business has more resources, financial resources. So in a certain way, you're able to use that to your advantage where like a smaller business might not have that access,
Hmm.
right? If you're on the smallest side, you have like adaptability and flexibility, right? Like even for me, like when I was just making fixed blades, I would change models. A model would have 5 or 6 iterations in between runs a lot of
Hmm.
times because it
Hmm.
was so easy for me to be like, oh, take my template. I want a little more like swell in the handle, and I'd change it. As you scale, those things become more difficult. That becomes now understanding how to design a robust model in CAD, right?
Hmm.
Because you know that you want to be able to make the changes. The same thing's true of the money, of the time. Like, it's really interesting, man. I'm curious to see how the next couple years go inside of the industry.
Yeah.
I think there are some areas that may experience some like heavier slowdowns, but who knows?
Yeah. No, it's gonna be interesting to watch, but at the same time, putting it on balance with believing in what you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's like I've shared that before, but it's like folk emphasizing what's happening around you too much is super problematic because there's always evidence that you're doing the wrong thing.
Right.
If you want to think that you're doing it wrong, you
Yeah.
can find a
You
reason to
can,
believe that.
yeah, you can verify. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Every negative idea is verifiable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is problematic.
It
'Cause-
really is.
yeah.
I like, in general, I like to focus on the things that are working
Hmm.
as opposed to the things that are not working. Not always the easiest to do, but I think that for me, there's more value in kind of leaning into things that are working. I also, you always hear the saying that like you can't be in a growth state 100% of the time. So like what is the opposite of growth would be like kind of like a stasis, right? Or
Hmm.
like coasting. I think that there is like more to it than that. I think that like an adaptive stage I think is probably pretty relevant where you're like, I'm not really growing, right? But I'm also not still.
Hmm.
I'm just adapting to like the situation and what is occurring presently.
Hmm.
Maybe that leads to growth. Maybe that leads to, coasting, but I think it's an active process, not a passive process. And so, yeah, I want to kind of like think on that a little bit more because I like, I just, that's to me right now, I think what I'm seeing in the industry is not necessarily 100% active or passive, but it's somehow that feels closer where it's like the companies that are being active and adapting are doing well.
Hmm.
The companies that are busy but like not adapting I think that's where maybe some of the problem lies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that feel
Yeah. No,
right? Like
that's right on
because you
track.
can be busy, but like sliding back or like
Yeah.
not gaining
Yeah.
ground.
You're shoveling coal, but you're not steering. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Steer the ship.
Steer. Yeah.
Should we just call it on that? I feel like
Yeah.
saying steer the ship and then like dropping it is awesome.
Yeah. Get yourself the biggest rudder, on the ocean and use that thing. Yeah.
Dude, maybe we could just do like a whole episode of just analogies.
Yeah, dude, that's all I do, honestly. I sometimes I'm like, man, I make too many analogies, too many
You and
metaphors.
your dad, I feel like
So
you and your dad could probably just put out a pretty sweet book.
yeah,
Like,
metaphors.
yeah,
Yeah,
dude.
right.
It'd be pretty fun.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for sticking with us through this crazy summertime. And thank you to everyone who is supporting on
Mm-hmm.
Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
We really appreciate you. If you want to support the pod, leave us a review or share it. And hopefully this year we're gonna we're kind of like getting back on track. It feels like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
closing
good
in on
stuff.
the end of summer, not to like be a downer, but
Yeah.
it's been 110 degrees where you are, so I'm sure you don't mind the idea of fall.
Sounds pretty good to me. We got
And
fires popping off too.
oh,
So
I was gonna ask, just side note, there's one in Burns, which is kind of like not midway between us, but it's huge.
yeah, yeah. The fires in central eastern Oregon are wild right now.
So, but that's
Hundreds of
not
thousands of acres.
close to you. Like you're not
Uh,
like where they say like Eastern Oregon, it's not pushing close to you at all.
it's close-ish in that we're buried in smoke.
Yeah, same.
But I mean, I do know one person who was evacuated from
No, it's close.
what's the town? Henderson? No,
Henderson, yeah.
is that what it is? Anyway, no, it's not Henderson.
It's
I forget.
not. I
Starts
know.
with
I
an
know
H.
it. Yeah.
But yeah, he was evacuated. But I mean, he lives out in Oregon. I don't see him on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, so it's pretty sticky because the wind keeps blowing and the heat keeps coming. And Idaho had like 5 or 6 or 7 fires start like
Yeah.
2 days ago. So
Oh,
not
gnarly
good.
fire season. All right.
Yeah.
You guys didn't need to hear that probably,
Yeah.
but if you are at risk of fire, stay safe. And
Yeah.
yeah, we'll see you guys
To our
next week.
European friends,
Yeah.
and enjoy the beautiful rain that you're probably seeing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right. Be well, guys.
Yeah. Peace.